I'm joined today by Selina Mason, who's Director of Masterplanning at Lendlease. She leads the master planning team across Lendlease Europe's substantial urban regeneration portfolio. So Selina, can you tell me a bit about the major projects you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, we've got a lot on at the moment. In London, Silvertown and Euston are the big ones going on at the moment, with Thamesmead also kicking off as well, our partnership with Peabody. Elephant Park in probably about 3/4 of the way through, still going strong. And High Road West is another, obviously up in Haringey, which we're working with Haringey on. And outside London, Smithfield in Birmingham. We have a couple out just on the edges of Milan. One is the old expo site, so is working with their expo out there, delivering a kind of innovation district there, and we've just got planning consent on that. So that's kind of really going strong. And the other one is Santa Maria Giulia, which is on the other side of the city. So the expo site is northwest, and Maria Santa Giulia is down in the southeast of the city.
Working on so many large-scale projects, and in the light of the fact that we're likely to see lots of changes in the planning of cities as a result of COVID-19, I mean, how do you ensure that what you're doing will be relevant in a very different world in the future?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because obviously it's causing, I mean, everybody sitting at home, working away, reflecting often very personally about their own experiences of life in lockdown, and, and making observations around how their neighbourhoods are reacting to change, thinking a little bit about how their businesses are changing, and then trying to extrapolate, okay, well, what does this mean for the city? It is a time, I think, of deep reflection as to what we're doing. I think what most people seem to be agreeing, and I think I'm with them, is that actually COVID seems to be accelerating a lot of things that were already in play. So retail, for instance, we were already grappling with consequences of the shift towards the internet shopping. That's obviously being accelerated. To some extent, we were already starting to see disruption in the commercial office sector with WeWork and kind of different models of how people might be going to and from work during the day. And equally, I think in housing as well, we were reflecting quite carefully around amenity and space standards. GLA obviously is very interested in this issue. So a lot of that thinking that was already in play, I think, is now really being crystallized and condensed into some quite pertinent questions around how our cities are going to be functioning. And it has become a moment, I think, of deep reflection about this. And what we're looking at in terms of our projects is really, I think we're starting to conclude that there's going to be no one answer for all the projects. I think it is really thinking quite carefully around each of them. They're all in slightly different locations. Silvertown is not a city centre site. It's central, but not city centre. So it will have a more neighbourhood feel. So I think it will function quite differently post-COVID. To, let's say, Euston, which is very, very central, very geared towards the commercial land use. And, if we can anticipate that maybe there might be fewer people coming to and from work, people working 2 days a week in the office rather than 5, that would change the nature of Euston potentially. Maybe we should be thinking of the land use balance there isn't quite right at the moment. Whereas Silvertown, we may think, actually, it's a neighbourhood. Maybe there will be more people there during the day. People will be working at home more often. So perhaps there, ironically, we might be thinking more retail. So no answers yet, but I think it is a time of thinking quite carefully, and it's really nuanced. I think this is really about understanding the actual places that you're working in and how they may or may not react to change that's now being accelerated. There's also, I think, in terms of housing, lots of questions around how we're building density and ensuring that the provisions for quality of life and amenity are really thought through carefully at the beginning, at master plan stage, so it's really built in from day one.
But we're also likely to see planning happening in a slightly different context in the future. The government is about to publish its review of planning, and it's thought that there will be some rather US-style zoning policies to speed up the planning system. Do you think that is a good idea, a good move?
It's really interesting. I think Planning for the Future is an interesting document to look at. It's kind of, it didn't really achieve quite the level of interest in our world as perhaps it would have done had COVID not just caused the lockdown almost immediately when that document was issued in March. So, but it does show direction of travel, and certainly they're talking in that document about kind of creative thinking and planning, trying to ensure that they can deliver more houses more quickly. At better quality as well. It's really great to see quality is writ large in that document. They talked about zoning alongside local development orders, which are obviously already in place here and haven't been used a great deal. But my instinct would be that the sort of the traditions and mechanisms and vested interests in the planning system we operate in probably will take on board the idea of zoning and shift it into more use of local development orders, I suspect, because that's a more flexible model that has been tried and tested, proven to be quite interesting and potentially quite successful, quite flexible, could be done over a city scale, neighborhood scale. And it does feel to me that there is any kind of planning that allows for a much better and deeper partnership between public and private, I think is always a good thing. That gives us as private sector certainty around long-term investment. But in the meantime, obviously the community are affected certainty too around the quality of what's going to happen, what infrastructure will be in place for them, real clarity around how their neighbourhood will change and what obligations are going to be placed on the developer to make sure that's done in a way that works for them. So, I mean, zoning, I'm sure there are people in government, there are lots of people in government, I suspect at the moment, who are into kind of completely dismantling the bureaucracy we currently occupy or live with. And zoning certainly would be one way of putting the cat amongst the pigeons in planning terms in this country. But I suspect we'll go for a kind of middle way that works in a slightly, in a way that kind of easily accommodates the existing systems, but does bring in some of that clarity of direction of travel and early agreement that zoning does. And that would be, I think, it feels to me like local development orders are probably really, I haven't actually worked in any master plans where they've been used, but I suspect they would be a good mechanism for doing large-scale regeneration over a long area and over a long time as well. Change is clearly afoot, but the British planning system has this way of actually changing a lot, but not changing much at the same time. That's what I've learned over the years. So we'll wait and see, but certainly I think LDOs are probably how things will go. And my instinct is that they probably would be a good thing, actually, as long as, I think the issue for me actually in the end is the capacity of planning authorities at the moment to be able to think through that in a coherent way and have they've been so denuded of capacity and capability over the last 10 years. I think those kind of big sweeping changes that really demand, as the government says in its paper, creative thinking. Where is that going to come from? I think there's got to be a recognition that there will need to be time and investment in the thinking as well as the doing.
Now, there are plenty of people at the moment suggesting that the era of the dense city has had its day. New York has been described by some as a sort of petri dish of the virus. What sort of city would you like to see emerging from this crisis?
Well, as I say, I think that a lot of the reflections that we have at the moment around change are kind of deeper reflections in a way of stuff that was probably already in the back of our minds or in the forefront of our minds beforehand. And I mean, when I look at my own neighbourhood, which is East Finchley in North London, it's held up really well under the current circumstances as a high street. It's done well, and it does feel to me as if this neighbourhood is in a way thriving. We're lucky enough to have, most of us have gardens, we have great open space near at hand and a high street that's it's got everything we need. But I can't help looking at East Finchley High Street and think, oh, that's a missed opportunity. We haven't, as with so many of our suburban neighbourhoods in London, a lot of the creative thinking and investment that has gone into public realm in the centre, we haven't seen the benefits of quite so much out in the suburbs. And I think there's been, again, it feels to me like this is in a way coalescing a lot of thinking that was already in play around how people use cities now. I don't think that cities any longer are really that the suburbs are there in effect for domestic life, and the city centre is there for working life, and you come in and you go out, and you come in and you go out. Life is much more complicated than that now. And I think our suburban areas haven't really had the investment, both in terms of quality of public realm, but also sort of kind of micro investment in infrastructure to help with those daily walking between jobs or cycling between jobs and activities. You know, the kind of the daily life in London is so much more complicated than our tube structure suggests it ought to be. And I think the success of the orbital railway lines is indication that life is complex. So for me, I think that probably where I would love to see things going is the kind of rebalancing. You know, there's a recognition across the board at GLA and amongst boroughs that actually the suburban areas are as important as the centre, and the centre thrives when the suburbs thrive, and vice versa. You know, the distribution of interest has got to be wider and more equitable, and that we have to be thinking, as well as the kind of big bomb projet and perhaps some of those big great ideas about transforming our streets in the centre, we should be bringing some of that thinking out into the suburbs and really thinking quite carefully and in a micro way, really at an absolute street by street neighbourhood level about quality of life in our suburbs, to unlock much more opportunity locally as well as in the centre. I mean, there's a lot of, I think there will be huge challenges for central city sites, there's no doubt about it, certainly in the short term, as it feels very, very clear that a lot of our big organisations are going to be shifting towards much more flexible working, with probably most people working 2, maybe 3 days a week in the offices in their central sites, and then obviously working at home for the rest, which will have an impact on the city centre. But and you know, maybe in the short term has an impact on values in the city centre. But I think we should trust our instincts on our cities. They will come out of this well. I think London is probably well placed because it's already got great potential in terms of public realm and open spaces. It's a green city, and I think if we focus much more on livability in centre and edge, I think London will come out this okay. Compared with other cities, perhaps New York is a case in point. It's obviously much, it's not quite as green as London. It maybe doesn't have that kind of, it perhaps isn't as resilient in that sense. So again, it's going to be something, each city will be different, I suspect.
Well, Selina Mason, thank you very much for your insights and for your time, and I look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully in person.
Hopefully, yeah, that would be lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a great conversation.